Every year around Halloween, we are treated to an outpouring of what could only be described as scare literature, telling us about how the holiday is satanic and evil and should not be celebrated by Christians. These opinions are backed up by some rather unusual and very frightening fantasies masquerading as historical facts. The following videos are not intended to address whether or not Satan exists, nor to show that witches are nice granola-eating vegetarians and tree huggers who wouldn't harm a fly. Nor is it an attack on fundamentalist Christians, but rather a discussion concerning some of the so-called facts offered in some anti-Halloween publications.
It has become commonplace to trace the roots of Halloween even further back in time to a pagan festival of ancient Ireland known as Samhain, or Samhain or Samhain, about which little is actually known. The prehistoric observance is said to have marked the end of summer and the onset of winter, and was celebrated with feasting, bonfires, and homage to the dead. Despite thematic similarities, however, there's scant evidence of any real continuity of tradition linking Samhain to the medieval observance of Halloween. Some modern historians, notably Ronald Hutton and Steve Roud, flatly reject the popular notion that November 1st was designated All Saints' Day by the Church, to Christianize the pagan festival. Citing a lack of historical evidence, Roud dismisses the Samhain theory of origin altogether. Certainly the festival of Samhain, meaning summer's end, was by far the most important of the 4 quarter days in the medieval Irish calendar, and there was a sense that this was the time of year when the physical and supernatural worlds were closest and magical things could happen, Roud notes. But however strong the evidence in Ireland, in Wales it was May 1 and New Year which took precedence. In Scotland there is hardly any mention of it until much later, and in Anglo-Saxon England even less. It seems reasonable to conclude that the connection between Halloween and the pagan Irish festival has, at the very least, been overstated in some modern accounts of Halloween's origin.
As for the dark medieval robes depicted by Schick in his comics, since the ancient Druids considered white their caste colors and brown or black the colors associated with the servant caste, they probably wouldn't have been caught, if you pardon the pun expression, dead in them. Domesticated cats were apparently not introduced to Northern Europe until post Julius Caesar, and didn't really catch on until after 1050 CE. Therefore, we should not expect cats to figure very much in their pre-Christian myths, and they don't.
You will discover that if you go back prior to the time of Christ, the same basic area, we go back to the Celts in history. And what we discover on this night is that this is the night when the spirits of the dead, good and bad, would wander about. This was the time you could communicate with them, that you could have contact. The problem is that you had both good and evil spirits. And so what people would do is they would put out food, they would give treats. And the words that would come out as trick or treat would mean that either you provide a treat or the evil spirits would do something to you. And they can be vicious and very harmful. And so that's where the origin of it comes from, the appeasement of spirits. Now through the years,
the actual historical practice seems to be mass individuals going from house to house and putting on a simple play or musical performance in return for food and drinks at New Year's. This is a long way from the evil Druid practices on Halloween. There is absolutely no evidence of wearing costumes of any sort on Halloween in the Middle Ages in Ireland, Scotland, England, or Wales, and if costumes were worn in the pagan era in the British Isles, the tradition was obviously broken up for a long time, long enough for paleo-pagan traditions surrounding it to totally die out. Now we do find a trick-or-treat custom in rural Scotland on and before the turn of the century in 1900s. But this was at Hogmanay, January 1st, New Year's Day, not on All Hallows Eve. And yes, if you didn't participate, if you didn't give out the candies or whatever, there were curses on homes that didn't treat their Hogmanay holiday visitors. But once again, this was on January 1st, not on All Hallows Eve.
By the turn of the century, Halloween had become an ever more destructive way to let off steam for crowded and poor urban dwellers. As Stuart Schneider writes, vandalism that had been limited to tipping out houses, removing gates, soaping windows and switching shop signs, by the 1920s had become nasty with real destruction of property and cruelty to animals and people. Perhaps not coincidentally, the disguised nighttime terrorism and murders by the Ku Klux Klan reached their apex during this decade. Schneider writes that neighborhood committees and local city clubs, such as the Boy Scouts, then mobilized to organize safe and fun alternatives to vandalism. School posters of the time call for a sane Halloween. Good children were encouraged to go door to door and receive treats from homes and shop owners, thereby keeping troublemakers away. By the 1930s, these beggars' nights were enormously popular and being practiced nationwide, with the trick-or-treat greeting widespread from the late 1930s.
The Halloween begging activity known as trick-or-treat comes from America in the 1930s, not the British Isles. The custom was intended to control and displace disruptive pranks.